I was saying in the first hour of the show, this was like the most anticipated movie of my life because Martin Scorsese is my favorite filmmaker by far. I think he's done some amazing work. I saw the first teaser trailer about 8 months ago, and I'm just basically counting down the days until then. So I saw your post on Facebook that you had walked out of the movie, and I immediately text my co-host here. I say, we have to see this. Jeffrey Tucker walked out. We have to have him on the show. We have to have him on the show because there's no way that I'm not going to like this movie. And then I started to imagine this debate that we would have. And we saw it maybe a day or two after I invited you on the show, and I didn't think it was that. I didn't think it was very good at all.
Oh, really? So your sense was, did you experience boredom after the first hour? Like, I mean, I wasn't exactly protesting. I was just like bored. You know, after about an hour, I thought, oh, to hell with it. I walked out.
I've seen enough people use drugs in my life that, you know, seeing another 3 hours of it really doesn't thrill me a whole lot.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. That's very interesting. So you were, I knew I was basically advertising for the film when I posted that status update. I thought, oh, now everybody's going to go see it.
The climb, the other thing that we identified in the article that we read in the first hour identified as well is that the climb was too fast. The arc was too steep for this character. And it would have been nice to, like the abuse of drugs, and really to the point, I'm using the word abuse because he's totally sacrificing the long term, including a wife and a child for, you know, short-term gratification in sometimes very, very dangerous ways. And there's drugs are fun, sure, but there's a tragic aspect to his abuse of drugs. And it just seems like it turns on a dime. They smoke crack outside a bar, as Osborne pointed out, and then they were off and running. And, you know, I didn't think the script was very good. I didn't think the characters were very well developed. And I think it kind of relied on gratuitous hedonism, as someone in the chat said, to drive the story. So,
And you know, there's another thing too. I mean, it's very interesting to me because I mean, it had this weird effect on me. I'm not like Mr. Politically Correct or anything like that, but the misogyny in it disturbed me like profoundly. I mean, I started to feel very uncomfortable for every woman in the audience. I thought, you know, this is just grim. It all began for me with the haircut scene, which I saw as clearly a metaphorical rape. I mean, I couldn't even stand watching that, and then it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And I couldn't bear it anymore. I mean, it was just, there's something that was about the film that seemed to be assaulting human dignity, you know, for half of humanity. And again, I feel like a prude or a Puritan or a severe, you know, feminist or something like that, you know, for saying these kind of things. But I found it just disturbing. And I didn't know why I didn't know why the movie was made, and I didn't know why people were willing to put up with it, actually. You know what I mean?
My theory, the story behind the movie is Brad Pitt tried to buy the rights to it. I guess Leonardo DiCaprio wound up buying the rights from Jordan Belfort and wanted Scorsese to direct it. And it's the kind of movie that is perfect for Martin Scorsese because, you know, the misogyny and a lot of the other sort of unsavory things that you see early in the movie is kind of setting the stage for what he does as a filmmaker and a storyteller best. He says, hey, look, here's some terrible people. Now watch me as I make you root for them. You know, I mean, if you look at movies like Goodfellas, Raging Bull, he takes these people who you would just run away from if you encountered them in real life, and he makes them the protagonist of the story. So unfortunately, I think that the scene that you're describing is they have a receptionist, or maybe she's a what do they call it? An investment associate who's actually taking phone orders after they close a deal. They bring her up in front of the whole company, and they shave her head and give her money to get breast implants. Which, it was kind of a disturbing scene. But I think initially, it's very clear that hey, these are, if not bad people, confused or troubled people doing bad things. Now they will become center stage. They will become the protagonists of this film. And that makes us uncomfortable. I was saying before, I think it makes it more interactive where, you know, Raging Bull is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I was sitting there and saying, am I rooting for this guy? Do I want this terrible human being to succeed? Am I sympathizing with such a person? So I think that would be one of my theories as to why the movie was made, because it fits that genre that Martin Scorsese is so good at.
So do you think, I mean, this is what confused me about the film. Do you think that Scorsese expected the viewers to sympathize with this guy, or no?
I don't think that he wants you to say, look at poor Jordan Belfort. What he wants is you to recognize the turmoil in which this person lives, but he wants to make them the center of the story. That's a recurring theme in his movies. Kubrick, another great filmmaker, was the same way. All of the people that are center stage in his movies are horrifying, from Jack Nicholson in The Shining to HAL 9000.
But I there's another problem with Wolf, I think, in that the plot was not complicated enough. There wasn't enough intrigue. I mean, it wasn't enough to engage. Maybe this is the bottom line. There wasn't enough to engage my intellectual imagination. I mean, I knew exactly where things were going, like from the very beginning, all the way to the end. I could write the script myself. And when you can see the narrative just like before you, for me, it became like a train wreck, and I just didn't want to watch it because I knew where it was going, and there was no interesting plot. I mean, unlike, say, Shining or something like that, which was interesting. I mean, you didn't know what was happening. There just wasn't enough complication in it.
Yeah. That's why I don't feel bad about spoiling it, because really, like, if you
there's nothing to say. Yeah.
If you watch 15 minutes of the movie, you know what's going to happen. And I think we looked at each other, Jason, when we were watching it, and we said, "Yeah, this is."
So my hope was actually that it was going to be another version of Wall Street, which I loved, from the 1980s. You remember this?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this was a great movie that was trying to condemn insider trading and make Wall Street look bad. But of course, every viewer was like wanting to be Gordon Gekko, And in the end, they had to reach really far to make insider trading look like a bad thing. And mostly everybody walked out going, "That's pretty cool. I want to be a Wall Street greedmeister," And I love that movie. I loved Gordon Gekko, actually. I thought it was just an amazing film. And despite the intention of the producer, the director, actually, I thought it would help to promote capitalism, and his greed speech was marvelous. I really liked it. I think it's entirely defensible. So I hope that Wolf would be the same way. And then I watched it, and it was just like, it horrified me, because I thought, this is the worst thing for anybody to think that this is what commerce is like. This is what finance capitalism is like. And it gave me the chills that anybody would look to this guy as a hero. Maybe they wouldn't, or I just don't really know. But I have to tell you that I've talked to a number of people who went to it, and very naively they say, "Wow, I didn't know that that's what Wall Street was like."
Well, that's a shame, I think, if people walk away from it with that. And we talked about this a lot at dinner. I think that the stock market is a tool, like a gun is a tool. You can use a gun to go out and hunt and catch dinner or protect your family, or you can use a gun to collect taxes. Right. So I think the stock market is the same thing. It's very valuable and important for allowing companies to raise capital for growth. I mean, that's its proper primary function. But I think that Stefan Molyneux, who's actually done a lot of good work on this subject, because he had some inside experience taking a company public years ago, said when you see a system like this that is just so largely confusing and disastrous and volatile, ask yourself the question, where's the force? And because of what I do, I try to say, where's the school? Where's the schooling residuals in Wall Street? And so I see like a work pain association with the rise of speculation. People say, I can be successful without research, without work, without patience. Yay. Because I hated how all those things were associated with school. And, another impact of schooling is that we are trained to defer to experts. Somebody calls us on the phone. They say, "Hey, buddy, I'm a stockbroker, okay? And you're just a guy. So boy, have I got great information for you," which is basically what Belfort and his cohorts are doing in that movie. So another place that I look for school is, are people trying to take advantage of other people's ignorance?
God, no kidding.
So
yeah, that's really a good insight.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I was wrong to walk out. I mean, some of the most disturbing scenes to me in that film were when the guy was on the phone selling something, and on the other end of the phone, I mean, he's sort of making, I'm screwing you gestures and fuck you gestures, and he's saying one thing and believing he's doing another. Do you remember that stuff?
Yeah. That was pretty powerful.
Upsetting to me because, I mean, that really upset me because the real world of commerce is actually not like that. Like, people cannot successfully, over long periods of time, rob others in a free market. That's not the way it works. You have to provide value to others who are consuming value. You're getting value. I mean, that's the magic of the market, is this mutually beneficial exchange. And to have it so aggressively and openly characterized as being basically, one person robbing another, that among many aspects of the film really disturbed me.
Now, obviously, in its purest form, the stock market is a good thing. There's no question about that. But this also comes back to what I was saying when we opened the conversation about, is government schooling creating distortions in what should be a market. And I think Wall Street is another prime example of this, not with maybe so much with schooling, but with the state itself. So you're right. People like Jordan Belfort wouldn't last 5 minutes in a truly free market.
No, I think that's right. But, but the other thing, I have to tell you that, and if you don't mind my interjecting this passing comment here, I've known a lot of really rich people, actually, who've made a lot of money in the market. None of them are like this guy, Jordan Belfort.
No, I've hardly ever met anyone like this.
I mean, they don't spend recklessly. Actually, they're weirdly penurious and reserved about their spending. In fact, most of the wealthiest people I've ever known are ridiculously scrupulous about their spending, actually. And they're not materialistic. I mean, you only have to look at people like Steve Jobs, for example, who lived like some sort of monk or something. I mean, this is actually not atypical. This is the very, very wealthy get rid of their property. They are ridiculously conservative in their spending, and that's one of the reasons they're rich. I mean, our caricature of the way the rich live is actually the way the poor live. I mean, just sort of squandering everything, on the high life. And our caricature of the way the poor live is actually the way the rich tend to live. I mean, the very rich are a very interesting bunch in that way.
But here's an interesting thing though that connects because there's two different kinds of rich. That there's the people who are rich like Jordan Belfort and people who are rich like Steve Jobs. Yeah. And the difference is that connects somebody like Jordan Belfort more to the recklessness of, say, somebody who is on welfare and lives at the maximum level of decadence for that income, is they are treating their assets like a stolen car because they know they didn't earn them. When you work your way up like Steve Jobs and you build all that stuff basically from the ground up, you have a great appreciation for what you have and a great care for the assets that you accumulate. And maybe that just isn't the case with, I mean, what happens to lottery winners? They're usually bankrupt 4 years later. That's a recurring theme with and I think that this kind of wealth that people like Belfort accumulated at this incredibly volatile time, either in, the New York Stock Exchange or the penny stock market, it didn't feel earned. And that might have contributed to the recklessness. But let me ask you this, though. There's a book that Rothbard wrote in the early 80s, and I'm wondering if you've read it or not. It's called Wall Street, Banks, and America's Foreign Policy.
Yeah.
Right? Because it seems like what Rothbard explains in that story is that there was at least a handful of families, and I can name a couple of them, Rockefeller and Morgan, who seem to find a way around most of the state's predation. And actually, according to the story that Rothbard tells, largely through the foreign policy exploits of the 20th century, put the state to work for them. So that, yeah, and this was disturbing for me too, because I talked to Tom Woods about this a while ago, and he said, don't make John Rockefeller and the Rockefeller Foundation the same thing. Don't make a man who worked his way up from nothing and this foundation that sought to impose itself on the minds and bodies of all people in America. I don't know if you're familiar with the Rockefeller Education Board or
Sure.
the investigation in the 1950s into tax-free foundations. But it seemed like there were a couple periods in history where there were people who were extremely wealthy, and they said, as I would say, you mentioned Teddy Roosevelt. I would say this happened again during FDR in a big way,
Sure.
where they said, okay, enough of this shit. What we need to do is figure out how to either beat these people, resist these people, or control these people. And it seems like there was a contingent of 19th century wealth that was able to get in a position of power beyond the state. And that's the story that Rothbard tells in that book. And this is kind of why I've been down on Wall Street, even though I recognize the valuable function that exists through the stock exchange. But there's nuance there, right? Like, I never on my show, especially when I'm talking to young people, I never want to demonize wealth. I hope they're all millionaires. But I also want them to understand nuance, right? So when we were talking before about distortions, there's ways that, I think that a lot of times I listen to conservative talk radio, and they're trying to draw this clear line, and the liberals do this too, between government and business, And I think there's more of a tangled web there in a lot of cases. And the stock market is a good example of that, because there's a lot of money forced into the stock market that creates distortions, pensions for public employees, Social Security, government bonds, all these things allow all this, or don't allow, they force people's money into the stock market. 15% of everybody's income is being invested in the stock market, and that can lead to some recklessness. But
I think everything you've said is exactly right. The only thing I would add to that is to provide a slight point of clarification on this, and this is where I think basically the left goes wrong.
Sure.
They look at the Wall Street and they go, look at all the corruption; it's just ghastly. The only thing, the libertarian insight here, and I think it's a very powerful one, is to say that the only reason that private parties are able to get away with basically criminality and corruption over the long term is because of the existence of the state.
Yep.
So yes, government is a problem, and yes, Wall Street is a problem. And in some sense, sometimes it looks like the private corporate cartel is more of a problem than even in Congress or the Supreme Court or the presidency.
Yeah.
The critical thing to recognize is that the state has a unique sort of feature to it, namely that it's able to get away with mass coercion legally. And Wall Street and the private sector is not, except to the extent it allies itself with the government. So between the two, we have to recognize that, what is a necessary and sufficient condition for wrecking society? And I would say that is the state. It's not finance capitalism.
No, absolutely.
And that's a subtle point, but and I think Rothbard would certainly agree with this. It's not as if Wall Street creates a state, or sustains it. It's in a way, the state is what sustains the private criminality, the cartels, and the corruption.
To put it in a way our younger demographic might understand, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Okay, so that's I find this more and more in podcasts. I take up way too much time saying something that somebody else could say in a much shorter space. So thank you for that. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Don't be a bad boy, Johnny.